How can the numbers 20, 30, and 50 help you budget? How can financial rules of thumb ruin your finances? And how much does a daily cup of joe cost over a lifetime? We'll answer those questions and more on this, the 68th episode of the DoughRoller Podcast.
Welcome to the DoughRoller Podcast, where the best thing money can buy is financial freedom. We help you make more, spend less, and invest the rest. And now your host, Rob Berger.
Whether you're just starting out, buried under a mountain of debt, or well on your way to financial freedom, this is the podcast to help you take your finances to the next level. Hey, everybody, this podcast is sponsored by Betterment, the most preferred automated investing service. Betterment has cutting-edge technology to optimize returns, minimize taxes, and save you time and money. Join over 34,000 customers who have already streamlined their portfolio management at betterment.com/roller. That's betterment.com/ROLLER. Well, today we're going to talk about a budgeting rule of thumb that I just love to hate. It's called the 50-20-30 rule of budgeting. I'm going to tell you what it is, maybe how it can help you, but also why you should think well beyond those sorts of rules of thumb. That's what we're going to cover today. Before we get to it, though, the money tip of the day, this is a coffee calculator. How much does that cup of coffee cost you over a lifetime? I know this is just such a worn-out issue. You know, what is it, the latte factor? You know, you don't go to Starbucks and, you know, you save a pile of money. And the funny thing is I sit here in my home recording this podcast, and this is the complete truth. I plan to go to Starbucks when I'm done with this show. I'm going to finish this episode, save it to my computer so I don't accidentally erase it, and then I'm going to go work at Starbucks for an hour. I know. And here I am talking about the cost of a cup of joe over a lifetime. But it came to my attention from an online calculator that's labeled Stop Buying Expensive Coffee and Save Money Calculator. There you go, right to the point, right? Let me give you the URL. It's a tricky one. It's I guess, huge calc. It's hughcalc.org/coffee.cgi. I think if you just Google Stop Buying Expensive Coffee and Save Money Calculator, it'll come right up. Basically, you can put in what the cost of a cup of coffee is for you at Starbucks or wherever you go. I think they fill it in with $3.50, but you can change that. I'll leave it alone. How many cups you have per day? It's listed as one. How many days per year you buy that cup of coffee? It's got 250, which I think is a sort of a typical work year. And then how many years you want to calculate this out? I've put 40, and your investment return, I've put 8%. I hit the calculate button, and it shows you year by year. And you know what the number is after 40 years? I'll give you a second. Think about it. Calculate. What's it going to be? All right, I'll tell you. $210,483.42. Now that's not in today's dollars, right? 40 years from now, that's going to be something less in today's dollars, but it's still going to be a big, big number. $210,483.42. And it's funny as I think about that, I think, well, maybe I won't go to Starbucks. You know, I'm not sure yet. But here's the thing. You know, I think this issue gets trotted out a little too often. But there's an important point here that's got absolutely nothing to do with coffee. And it's this. Small expenses repeated over time add up. And I would say just as equally important point is this. So do small savings. You know, so many people think, well, if I just save a little, it's not going to help me. What difference is it going to make? And you're right. In a month, 6 months, maybe even a year, saving, what is this again, $3.50 a day, 250 days of the year, in the first year won't make a big difference. But with the power of compounding over time, it will. And that's really the takeaway for this money tip of the day. Small expenses repeated over time add up, but so do small savings. So there you go. And speaking of savings and expenses, that brings us to our main topic today, which is the 40-20-30 rule of budgeting. Maybe you've heard of it. I'm sure some of you haven't. A company called LearnVest sort of popularized this rule of budgeting in recent time, although it certainly goes back before LearnVest. And I've seen a number of personal finance experts write about it. And I think it does have some advantages, at least as a starting point, but it can also lead you astray. So we're going to walk through it today. So let's start first with what is the 50-20-30 rule of budgeting. And basically what it says is this: you should divide your spending and savings into basically three buckets. And this is all based on after-tax dollars. So the first bucket, the 50% bucket, goes toward necessities. And of course, we can disagree on exactly what are necessities versus non-essentials. But generally, necessities are going to include shelter, food, utilities, some level of transportation, some level of clothing, the things that you need, to get by day to day and to get to your job, and that sort of thing. That should comprise no more than 50% of your take-home pay. That's the 50% bucket. The 20% bucket goes to long-term savings and extra payments on any debt that you have. So, for example, it would include, contributions to your 401k or your IRA and that sort of thing. If you, say, have a car loan, paying on the car loan, might be considered a necessity, because you've bought a car. But if you make any extra payments, for example, on your debt, that would go into the 20% bucket and things like that. And so that's sort of your financial priorities, your long-term savings and some debt repayment. That should be 20%. I don't include in that, by the way, saving for a vacation. That goes into the third bucket, the 30% bucket, which is your lifestyle choices. So that would be things like vacations and entertainment and gym fees and hobbies and pets, eating out, expensive cell phone plans and cable packages. The things that you don't absolutely have to get by, but you choose them, again, lifestyle choices. So that's the 30% bucket. And that's the idea. It's pretty simple. You can budget with three categories. 50% budget for your necessities, 20% goes to your financial priorities, primarily saving, but also some debt repayment, and then 30% goes to your lifestyle choices. And that's the 50-20-30 rule of budgeting. Now, I do want to give you my thoughts on it, but before I do that, I want to kind of discuss a pretty significant shift in my own thinking on money that's occurred, in the last 5 or 6 years. Before I started blogging about personal finance in 2007, I think I was very much like most people. I went to college, got a job, and I started spending. We saved some, so we didn't spend everything we made, but our savings was typically the 5 to 10% range. We'd save into our 401k. I did save a little bit beyond the 401k. But my attitude was that my job was what was going to finance our living expenses until we retired at age 65 or whatever. It was all about the job. Go to work 40, 50 hours a week, earn the income, save a little, spend the rest. And so with that sort of mindset, I did what probably most people do and probably what most of you do. I got the new car. I got the big cable package and big TV. I got the big house. Then I got a bigger house. Took the family on expensive vacations. Did the things that I think, sort of most middle-class folks in America do. And in that sense, I was probably very normal. But that changed as I started to write about personal finance and started to blog about it. And the change wasn't immediate, but as I wrote about personal finance and blogged about it and started to save a little more money and pay off a little more debt and then watched our retirement nest egg grow, I had this aha moment. And it was a combination of things. One was, that money we're saving, it's starting to add up. It's starting to become more significant. It takes some time. You need to benefit from the power of compounding. But after a while, you start to think, really that money is going out and working for me. It's almost like I'm sending out employees and they're working for me and giving me all the returns back. And it's starting to grow, and it's starting to be something more than insignificant. And I can now start to see, that can actually fund a fair amount of our expenses, particularly if we lived a more frugal lifestyle. And as I saw that happening, I started to realize really what's important to me. And it's not the bigger house and the expensive vacations and the new car and the 200-channel cable package. It was my freedom. It was the ability to do. It wasn't that I wanted to quit and not work at all and have no source of income, but rather I wanted the freedom to work when I wanted to work, where I wanted to work, and doing what I wanted to do. I didn't want to be chained to a desk. 5 days a week. And I realized that I could give up things that at first seemed important to me, the things that I listed, the bigger houses and the newer cars and the cable packages and the expensive vacations. And I could trade those in for freedom. I could trade those in for a lifestyle that spends less money, that allows us to save more. And in return, I get this sense of freedom and an ability to work when I want and how I want and to do what I want. You know, when you're just starting out, that seems almost like an impossibility. When I graduated from college, we had no money. My wife and I, we had debt. I had about $55,000 in school loans. So we had a negative net worth. And at that point, you know, if I save $500 that month or $1,000 or whatever in a 401k, yeah, it's going to help me presumably when I'm 65, but how's it going to help me now? And the truth is, at that moment in time, it really wasn't going to help me much. It would be a start. It would be towards the future, but it's not going to change our lives right away. And I think that's a big reason that a lot of people don't save more and don't cut back because they don't see the advantage anywhere near the near term. It's always 20, 30, 40 years away. And that just shifted for me. Part of it was because I've been saving for a while, but I think part of it was just learning more and more about personal finance. So when I look at money now, I see it in a different light. I don't see money as something as to what it can buy me in terms of stuff, but rather I look at it and see the freedom it can give me and my family. Do you ever notice where people that you think have a lot of money, and maybe they do, seem cheap? I've had a lot of discussions with folks about that idea. I know that person's wealthy, and man, they just watch every dime. And in some ways, my stepmother, who passed away a couple of years ago, was that way. She watched every dime. And you know why? Because she lived off of her wealth. She was in retirement, and she had done pretty well for herself. And she did have a part-time job. But by and large, she lived off of her nest egg. And, you know, you think about a $1 million nest egg, how much income can that generate in a year? Well, if you use the 4% rule, which is sort of, you know, people debate whether that's the right number, but it's sort of a generally accepted rule of thumb as to how much you can draw down from a nest egg. $1 million generates $40,000 in income. That's not a lot of money. And so she did watch what she spent, but she did it because, one, she had to. She wanted her nest egg to last, obviously. But two, it was how she enjoyed freedom. It allowed her to work part-time in a job she loved. She was a pilot and worked for a company that built some things for pilots. But it didn't generate a lot of income for her, but she enjoyed it. And she enjoyed doing other things in her community. And having that nest egg and being able to live a frugal life allowed her to choose that kind of lifestyle. And as I've gotten older, it's exactly what I'm trying to achieve. And it puts saving in a whole different category. I just am stunned now when I see someone that I know is struggling financially, and they pull in with a brand new car that they financed. I guess they can afford the payment, but what in the world are they thinking? Or they seem so casual about the money that they spend. And, you know, I was that way, and I'm still learning. I still make mistakes. As I mentioned, I'm debating whether to go to a Starbucks after I record this podcast. Perhaps not the end of the world, but as a pattern, as a habit, it means I'm spending more than I need to. That I'm at some level exchanging my potential freedom down the road for a cup of coffee. And that's how I think about things now. That doesn't mean I don't ever go to Starbucks and get a cup of coffee, but it does mean that I put all of the money we spend through that lens. And that's why, for example, I'm reducing the cost of our cell phone plans by getting phones that aren't perhaps as nice, and I'm reducing our cable package. In fact, the only reason we have cable is because, believe it or not, our package is cheaper with it, which still baffles me. But we don't ever watch cable, and it's the limited package, and it saved us $50 a month. And why at some point I want to downsize. As I mentioned, we moved to the big house, and then we moved to the bigger house, and that was before I had this aha moment, and this whole mindset towards money changed. And now I look at how much it costs to heat this house and to cool this house and to maintain it. It's a lot of money, and we just don't need it. So we're working on those things. But I wanted to share that with you, curious where you are in your own journey and how what your attitude is towards money. That's mine, and it's through that attitude that I look at this 50, 20, 30 budget. So what are my thoughts on this approach to budgeting? First of all, I actually think 20% in savings is a pretty decent savings rate. Certainly there are some folks that save a lot more. My interview, if you have not listened to podcast 7, DoughRoller.net/podcast 7, I encourage it. It was my interview with Mr. Money Mustache, who retired at age 30, and he was saving upwards to 70% of his income, and he's sort of the early retirement extreme crowd, and a lot of fun to read his blog, and you can check out that interview, again, DoughRoller.net/podcast 7. But that being said, I think if someone is saving 20% of their income, they're doing a pretty good job. But here's the thing. That is very hard for a lot of people to do given their current spending. And when you think about the 50, 20, 30 budget, the first thing that comes to mind is just what you spend on shelter and cars. If you're like a lot of folks, you've probably, particularly if you've bought a home, you may have taken on a bigger mortgage than you should have, and you've got that $20 or $30 or $40,000 bank financed car sitting in the drive. And depending on your income, boy, those two things alone can eat up almost 50% of some budgets right there. So if that's you, I think the 50, 20, 30 budget can actually be a good thing to shine some light on these issues and maybe suggest that you need to make some changes. 50% seems like a lot, but boy, for a lot of families, they're spending far more than that on what you would group as necessity. So it really highlights the importance of keeping your costs for mortgage or rent as low as possible, and to forego those expensive bank-financed cars for something that you can afford to pay in cash. That's the first thing. The second thing is rules of thumb are fine as a starting point. I think it's fine to compare your spending to the 50, 20, 30 budget as a rule of thumb. But realize it's just that. It's a starting point. This is not a one-size-fits-all. Part of it depends on your income. Are you making $50,000 a year, or are you making $500,000 a year? And if you're making somewhere in between, let's say you're making $100,000, and you're thinking, boy, I don't think I can get by with 50% of my take-home pay on necessities. Well, what do you think folks do that make 60? I mean, you can get by, right? The first thing to recognize is this is all about the choices that we make, and I do understand that every circumstance is different, but by and large, I think from the most people that I talk to, the problem is the spending more than it is the income. We all want to make more. I get that, and some folks are in difficult situations, perhaps even unemployed, and I understand that as well. But I think for folks in the United States as a whole, our biggest problem is the spending, not the income. So I think this is a good starting point. But boy, if you're making certainly above average income, you ought to be looking to do better than spend 50% on necessities and save only 20%. So again, it's a rule of thumb, but go beyond that. Look at your specific circumstances to see if you can do better. And that also is true with the 20% bucket. I think saving 20% is a good start, but boy, you ought to aim for more. And again, that seems that sort of goes against the sort of traditional, I think, advice of save 10 to 15%. And I think that's what we've become accustomed to in the United States. But you can save 20%. You can save more than that. And part of it depends on your priorities. Like I said, I had that moment, that aha moment, where my attitude towards savings shifted dramatically. And so for me, I wouldn't be happy at a 20% savings rate. I want to go higher. So again, 50, 20, 30 budget, starting point, a rule of thumb. But I think you can try to do better. And part of that, and this is sort of the fourth point, is really think about necessities versus lifestyle choices. I think that for most of our spending, it's a lifestyle choice. I mean, for example, we need a place to live, true, but for us, we don't need to live in the house we live in. Our house is a lifestyle choice. We could significantly reduce our monthly expenses by moving to a different place. The same is true with the cars we drive. The same is true with the clothes that we wear. And I'm not a big, a clothes kind of person. I don't spend a ton of money on clothes. But when we look at all of these necessities, we tend to spend more than we would truly need to. And I'm speaking from my own experience. So really think about what are necessities versus lifestyle choices as you think through this 50, 20, 30 budget. I think if you're honest with yourself, you may find that a lot of things that might on the surface fit in the necessity bucket actually include a lot of lifestyle choices built in. I know that's certainly true for us. And then the final thing I'll say is, as you know, if you've listened to this podcast for a while, I'm a big fan of YNAB. You Need a Budget. It's the software that I use, and I found it to be the best budgeting software available. And YNAB doesn't really deal with this 50, 20, 30 type approach. It's more nuts and bolts. How much are you spending on categories that you create? You can create a 50, 20, 30 budget within YNAB. You could have 3 categories: necessities, financial priorities, and lifestyle choices. Those could literally be your categories. You could set up a 50, 20, 30 budget within YNAB, and you might even do that at a high level and then have some subcategories. That's fine too. But the thing that I like about YNAB is it really forces you to think beyond these sorts of rules of thumb and to really look at the details as to how you're spending your money. And it's an eye-opener for us. I look at what we spent at restaurants last month, and what I spent at Starbucks, right? I gotta look at that, and what we spent on clothes, and on and on. And I think, to truly effectively manage your money, you've got to go beyond these sorts of rules of thumb like the 50, 20, 30 budget. It's fine as a starting point, but you got to go beyond that to look at specifically how you're spending your money and how you can do better. That's what we're trying to do, and it's a process. I mentioned that change that I had when I started this blog. One thing I found, though, is that when you've lived a certain way for 20 years and you've bought the cable packages and the new car and the big house and the bigger house and the expensive vacations, it's hard to scale back. I mean, some things you can scale back easily, but even just imagine having a discussion with your significant other about getting rid of the 200-channel cable package. Yeah, that might be a huge fight in your home. That wasn't in our home, but it was a discussion. It was a discussion. And while I think at some point we'll downsize, that's not going to happen immediately. And there are a lot of reasons for that. It goes beyond just where you live. There are family issues and other things. But that's the point. Once you start down that path of living kind of like everybody else does and pursuing the American dream, as some people define it, it really is hard to reverse course, and it takes time. It doesn't happen immediately. And so that's something to think about, particularly if you're just starting out. That sort of lifestyle creep, that your lifestyle rises with every pay raise kind of approach to living and expenses is really hard to reverse. I've learned that myself firsthand, and so that's something to think about before you head down that path. Anyway, that's my take on the 50, 20, 30 budget. I think it's an okay starting point. It's an okay comparison for how you're spending your money. But one, you really need to go beyond that into the details. And two, 20% for savings, try to do better than that. And look at the freedom that it will ultimately provide you much, much earlier than, say, age 65. At least that's my approach and what I'm trying to accomplish. Hey, if you've used the 50, 20, 30 budget, though, let me know. Love to hear how it's worked out for you, what you like about it, and what you don't like about it. Hey, that brings our show to a close. As always, you can get the show notes. Just go to DoughRoller.net/podcast68, DoughRoller.net/podcast68. If you haven't already, you can sign up for the newsletter. Just go to DoughRoller.net/newsletter. We send out one newsletter a week every Saturday night, packed full of links to articles to help you make the most of your money. You can subscribe to this podcast and leave a review on iTunes. Just go to DoughRoller.net/iTunes. Appreciate any honest ratings and reviews you can provide. And lastly, love to hear from you. Questions, topics you want me to cover, whatever. Shoot me an email at dr@DoughRoller.net. Love to hear from you. I read every email and I respond to every single email. Hey, until next time, remember, the best thing money can buy is financial freedom.